So you're saying that we're at war?
We are absolutely, when it comes to narco trafficking groups and criminal gangs that are targeting the United States for criminal activity.
We're in a state of war.
There's no doubt about the fact that we're
So then,
confronting them in a
do the
warlike setting
international
because
laws
they're
of
waging
war
war on
apply, and do the Geneva Convention
They're waging
apply?
war against us and their enemy combatants as a result of it.
What you just saw is only the beginning. Because beneath that exchange is something far more revealing, a crack in the story no one on that panel expected to expose. And the real question isn't why he said it, but why he tried so hard not to. Stay with me. This doesn't end where you think it ends.
Gentlemen, do I understand that you're yielding to Senator Duckworth? Is that correct? Both of you? Senator Van Hollen? Are you going to yield to Senator Duckworth? Okay. Senator Duckworth.
I thank my colleagues. My daughter has dental surgery, so they're being very kind so I can get her through that. Thank you. Mr. Secretary, last March, the President invoked the Alien Enemies Act, a notorious wartime law last used for Japanese internment. He said that he was responding to the Maduro regime's supposed invasion or other acts of war against the United States. But in recent weeks, you, the Department of Justice, and our friends across the aisle have repeatedly said that we are not at war with Venezuela. Secretary Rubio, if that is true and we are not at war with Venezuela, will you advise the President to rescind his invocation of the Wartime Alien Enemies Act?
Well, that was a mechanism to remove people from our country that prevent grave danger. So, for example, we know for a fact that Tren Agua is a very dangerous gang. In fact, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, I may have been the first member of Congress.
This is a wartime act, Mr. Secretary.
Well,
are we currently at war with Venezuela?
No, we're not in a state of war in Venezuela.
Okay, the Supreme Court has described the Alien Enemies Act as a wartime power, our Supreme Court. And before now, the Alien Enemies Act was only invoked during the War of 1812, World War I, World War II, when it was used to intern thousands of innocent civilians. Are you really arguing that the President should be able to wield an internment law?
No, but we're talking about two separate things here. So you're talking about the state of Venezuela or are describing the regime. And we're talking about, but what the President designated.
Invoked the Alien Enemies Act.
I know, Senator, but let me be clear with you. No, but what the President was talking about are these gangs that have, and these narco trafficking groups that are waging war on the United States. There's no doubt. These groups have waged war on the United States. They have waged, for example, Tren Agua is not just a criminal gang presence in our street. It is a criminal gang directly responsible for narco trafficking.
The Trump administration has acknowledged that the vast majority of the men it rounded up and deported to torture under this law had no criminal records whatsoever.
We didn't torture anybody.
Over 75%.
Who did we torture? We haven't tortured anybody. We've arrested people that are members of gangs and we've deported them. We don't want gang members in our country.
Investigations have found that many of the men were here legally. If the administration is willing to lie about who it's targeting under this law, what protections do totally innocent people have against abuse? Again, I want to ask you, will you advise the President to rescind his invocation of the Wartime Alien Enemies Act?
No, of course not. I mean, these are people that are threats to the national security of the United States. But I've described this in hearings in the past, including before you guys.
So you're saying that we're at war?
We are absolutely. When it comes to narco trafficking groups and criminal gangs that are targeting the United States for criminal activity.
We're in a state of war.
There's no doubt about the fact that we're confronting them in a warlike setting because they're waging war on us.
And do the Geneva Convention
They're waging war against us and their enemy combatants as a result of it. And the fact of the matter is that we are confronting these irregular groups, and that's one of the great challenges of the new century in this hemisphere in particular, is that these non-state actors who possess state-like capabilities in terms of their weaponry pose a grave danger to the United States. I don't think any American would dispute that we have cartels that pose a threat to the national security of the United States.
With all of the other laws of when it comes to warfare. I mean, you're saying that he can invoke this wartime power.
No, I'm saying, you're asking me, I'm here to discuss foreign policy and what's in the realm of the Department of State.
Well,
I think your questions are better directed to the Department of Justice.
Enemies Act,
but I would tell you that,
which is a wartime, which is something that
yeah, but you're asking me a question that
can be invoked during wartime.
But you're asking
and it's
me a
only
question
been invoked during the War of 1812, World War I, and World War II.
You're
it's only
asking
been
me a
invoked 3
question.
times, and this President is invoking it.
Okay, you're asking me a question about the domestic application of a law that's best directed to the Department of Justice.
No, it is
because you're asking me something to opine on something that's in the realm of the Department of Justice in terms of its domestic application. I can tell you that the United States is most certainly confronting terrorist and criminal organizations operating in our hemisphere that pose a grave danger to the United States. Anyone who believes that gangs that flood our country with fentanyl or cocaine are not threats to the United States is not living in reality and certainly does not reflect the opinion of most Americans.
The President already said that he was ready to put American troops in Venezuela again. So we're at war right now.
When did he
So
say
if
that?
things don't go well with the Chavistas you've empowered,
When did the
what
president
is your
say he was gonna put
criteria for
troops in
returning
Venezuela?
a military option, putting you? What is your criteria for returning to a military option and putting boots on?
Well,
the ground?
I don't recall the president saying he was going to put troops in Venezuela. Where did he say that?
I'm asking you, what are your?
But that's what you said. I didn't
Yeah,
remember
the president has
saying
already
that.
said that he was ready to put American troops in Venezuela.
No, I think the president has said that he retains the right as commander-in-chief to protect the United States against any imminent threats. Maybe that involves troops, maybe that involves air power. We hope, but we don't anticipate that being the case in Venezuela.
I worry that you are playing fast and loose with our nation's
Well, I just gave
military.
you
And
testimony
let me
here
just say,
for
I just want to conclude by
Yeah,
saying,
but I just gave you testimony of how well things are moving forward, not as fast as
yeah, but
everybody
you
would like.
also said
So
that
why-
in 6 or 9 months, if things don't go well, you're going to have to do something else. And the president's already said that he's not ruled out the military option. And you've also just said that, yes, we are at war. The president has
But
wartime
every
powers.
president retains
So
the power to
it's
use military to
reasonable for me
protect-
to ask you,
And I gave you a very specific example. Every president retains the right to defend the United States against an imminent threat. Yes, if there are just give you an example, Iranian drones deployed in Venezuela that could threaten the United States, we most certainly will address that, even if it's located in Venezuela. But we hope we don't get to that point. We don't expect to get to that point.
I don't think that
We're not trending in that direction. That's a fact. But that said, on
the
the one
people of
hand,
America
people
are
here are
worried that
unhappy
this
we're
is a president
cooperating
who
with
engages
Venezuela.
in yet
On the other hand, they
another
want us to
forever
go to
war,
with
Mr.
them.
Secretary.
What's
We don't
that?
need to be in another forever war, and that is the path that we are going towards. And let me just say,
Well, how are we
let me
going towards
conclude-
a
let me
forever
just- let
war
me
if we're
just
dealing with
conclude.
we're
Well,
dealing
you're
with
not
Delcy
ruling out a
Rodriguez every
military
day?
option. You're not going to ask him to rescind his invocation of the Alien Enemies Act. That puts Americans in jeopardy. And let me just say something about the president's recent comments about NATO allies. When I served in Iraq, there were Polish forces there with us. There were British forces there with us. There were Spanish forces there with us. I personally landed in Elzi, España, which came under direct attack by insurgents. Polish troops who have worked with the Illinois military, with the Illinois National Guard for 30 years, died in Afghanistan, Mr. Secretary.
All the president
so I just
wants
wanna
is for
say
NATO to
is
have
that
more
our NATO
capabilities.
allies have stood beside
wants
us,
our allies to
and
have more
we
nav-
need to maintain the strength of that alliance.
I get it.
yield
All
back.
the
Senator, your
president wants is our
time's
allies.
up. Not making much progress here.
Well, let me just
very
say, the
much.
president
Let's-
just wants our allies to have more capabilities to be involved in operations like that, God forbid, in the future if necessary.
That's not what
not
he
an
said.
unreasonable
He said
request.
that they stayed a little behind, and they certainly did not come to our defense. And
Well,
which
not
they
every
did.
country in Europe, not every country in NATO participated in those missions. Some did.
Denmark suffered some of the greatest military casualties.
There's no doubt that many of our allies have stepped forward and provided assistance to us, and there are many others that simply don't have the capability to do it now or in the future.
That's not what the president said.
So
Senator
that's what he
Lee,
was pointing to.
What just happened? The footage you just watched shows a sitting U.S. senator pressing a senior administration official on one of the most extraordinary uses of executive power in modern history: the invocation of the Alien Enemies Act. Senator Tammy Duckworth's line of questioning was direct, structured, and grounded in documented precedent. In contrast, Secretary Marco Rubio's responses consistently shifted between reframing, narrowing his domain of authority, and repositioning the president's intent. The central clash arose when Duckworth attempted to pin down the justification for using a wartime statute that has historically only been activated when the United States was formally at war with another nation. Rubio acknowledged repeatedly that the U.S. is not in a state of war with Venezuela, yet he defended the president's reliance on a wartime authority by redefining war in terms of cartel and gang activity. This contradiction formed the spine of the exchange, and once exposed, it remained unresolved throughout the remainder of the hearing. What it actually means. The record shows that Duckworth's questions were not abstract. She tied every inquiry to concrete historical precedent. War of 1812, World War I, World War II. The only prior instances in which the Alien Enemies Act had been invoked. Those cases involved state-to-state conflict. Rubio's argument expanded the definition of war beyond nation-states to include criminal organizations. In doing so, he attempted to reconcile the administration's public position that the U.S. is not at war with Venezuela, with the president's use of a statute limited to wartime circumstances. The transcript reveals a clear pattern. Whenever Duckworth asked whether the U.S. was at war, Rubio answered no. When she asked whether the president's actions required wartime authority, Rubio shifted the frame to gang violence, drug trafficking, or non-state actors. He repeatedly described these organizations as waging war on the United States. Yet he did not claim that these conditions met the statutory threshold for invoking the Alien Enemies Act. This is not a subtle distinction. A wartime power designed for state actors was being defended on the basis of non-state threats. Rubio did not offer a legal theory to connect those concepts. Instead, he offered a security rationale, one that does not align with the law's defined scope. The testimony demonstrates that the administration's justification for invoking the act was not coherently defended when scrutinized across multiple questions. Rubio acknowledged that the U.S. is not at war. He also defended an action allowed only during war. This is a documented inconsistency, not an interpretive one. What was not said? Several notable omissions emerge from the transcript. First, Rubio never articulated a statutory basis for applying the Alien Enemies Act to individuals not engaged in military conflict on behalf of a foreign state. The act was originally crafted to address threats posed by citizens of enemy nations during declared wars. At no point did Rubio explain how domestic arrests of individuals, many without criminal records, as referenced in the questioning, would meet the standard for wartime detention powers. Second, Rubio did not dispute Duckworth's point about the administration's misrepresentation of who was targeted under the act. Instead, he redirected the discussion to gangs and drug trafficking groups without addressing the documented discrepancy between stated targets and actual enforcement outcomes. Third, Rubio avoided answering whether he would advise the president to rescind the invocation. His refusal was categorical. Of course not. No additional criteria were offered. No limiting principles were described. No safeguards for innocent individuals were discussed. Duckworth's concern that innocent people could be swept up under a wartime statute being used outside a wartime context went unanswered in every substantive sense. Fourth, when Duckworth cited the president's prior public statements about not ruling out military options in Venezuela, Rubio responded by questioning whether the president had said such a thing, then reframed the discussion around the president's inherent authority to respond to imminent threats. This shifted the exchange away from prior commitments and toward hypothetical future scenarios, leaving Duckworth's original point unaddressed. Finally, Rubio did not resolve the internal tension between dismissing the prospect of conflict and describing a posture that resembles preparation for conflict. Statements such as "we hope we don't get to that point," and "we're not trending in that direction," acknowledge the possibility of escalation, yet do not clarify why wartime authorities are required in the absence of war. The bigger picture. What the transcript actually reveals is an administration trying to redefine the boundaries of wartime powers without formally declaring war, acknowledging war, or meeting the established legal criteria for war. This is particularly significant because the Alien Enemies Act is one of the broadest, least constrained wartime statutes still on the books, a remnant of eras defined by mass detention and national suspicion. Duckworth's line of questioning drew attention to the implications of applying such a law in a modern context. Her references to Japanese internment and historical abuses were not rhetorical. They were part of a documented lineage of how the act has been used. When she noted that many of the individuals targeted had no criminal records and were legally present in the U.S., she highlighted a critical danger. When wartime powers are applied outside wartime, oversight weakens and safeguards erode. Rubio's repeated emphasis on cartels and gangs presented a national security rationale, but not a legal justification. The distinction matters because national security concerns do not alone grant wartime authority. The absence of clarity on this point is not simply an oversight, it reflects a broader pattern where expansive executive power is defended through rhetorical framing rather than statutory interpretation. Another pattern in the transcript is the strategic shifting of responsibility. Rubio frequently redirected questions about legal authority to the Department of Justice, claiming that domestic application of the law falls outside the State Department's purview. Yet he simultaneously defended the president's decision to invoke the law and asserted security justifications. This created a gap in accountability. The person defending the action claimed not to be the appropriate person to answer for its legality. Duckworth's repeated attempts to bring the discussion back to first principles. Are we at war? What is the statutory basis? Who is being targeted? What safeguards exist for innocence? Exposed that the administration had not publicly articulated a consistent or legally grounded rationale for using the Alien Enemies Act in this context. Her concerns about a forever war and the risk of empowering the executive branch to treat criminal organizations as wartime adversaries were not addressed in substance. Rubio either reframed the question, narrowed the domain, or shifted to hypotheticals. No clear limiting metric was established for when wartime powers would not apply. final verdict. When you strip away the deflection and rhetorical repositioning, what remains is a documented contradiction at the core of the administration's position. Rubio acknowledged that the United States is not at war with Venezuela, yet defended the use of a law restricted to wartime. He justified the action by invoking non-state threats that do not meet the legal threshold for wartime application, and declined to provide criteria for rescinding the invocation. No clarification was offered regarding the discrepancy between public claims about targeting criminal groups and the documented reality that many individuals impacted had no criminal records. None was attempted. The transcript shows that questions about who is protected, who is at risk, and how far the authority extends were left unanswered. The pattern here is not subtle, expansive executive power defended through shifting definitions, vague references to threats, and the absence of clear legal justification. Duckworth's questioning exposed those gaps. Rubio's responses did not close them. And the tension between asserting we are not at war while defending wartime powers remains unresolved and consequential. If you want more breakdowns like this where powerful people get pressed on the record, hit subscribe and drop your take in the comments. Who do you think came out stronger in this hearing, and what was the one moment that changed the whole exchange?